Welcome to the virtual learning series Departmental Showcase hosted by the Federal Youth Network. Je m'appelle Guillaume Kofi. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am here on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I encourage all of you to acknowledge the land you are as well. As we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button in the official language of your choice. You can vote for questions you like by clicking on the thumbs up button. Pendant le déroulement de cette session, nous vous invitons à partager vos questions en utilisant le bouton Q&A ou questions-réponses dans la langue officielle de votre choix, bien sûr. Aussi, vous pourriez voter pour une question que vous voudriez bien voir posée en appuyant, bien sûr, sur pouce en l'air ou thumbs up. Merci encore de vous joindre à nous. Et puis, en tout cas, à Ottawa, ici, j'ai la chance, nous sommes gratifiés par une belle saison, une belle température, un beau jour. En ce jour de 20 juin, à la veille du début officiel de l'été, est-ce que nous pourrions demander plus à Dame Nature ou à Mère Nature? Je ne pense pas. Ce n'est pas un hasard, ce n'est pas une coïncidence. Nous recevons aujourd'hui même Ressources naturelles Canada. Oui, nous sommes heureux. Sans plus tarder, je voudrais passer la parole à notre modérateur du jour, Zach. C'est à toi. Merci beaucoup.
Donc, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Welcome to Natural Resources Canada Departmental Showcase, hosted by the Federal Youth Network. Mon nom est Zachary et je suis analyste des politiques au Service canadien des forêts à Ressources naturelles Canada. I am also VP internal to the Young Professionals Network here in the department, and it is with great pleasure that I will be chairing today's session. La séance d'aujourd'hui sera effectuée dans les deux langues officielles, alors je vous invite à utiliser la langue de votre choix pour interagir par clavardage ou la fonction question-réponse lorsque vous serez invité à le faire. So today's session will be carried out in both official languages, so I invite you to use the language of your choice to interact through the chat when prompted to do so. Par contre, avant d'aller plus loin, j'aimerais reconnaître que je vous adresse aujourd'hui la parole de Gatineau, qui se situe sur le territoire ancestral et non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from 5 amazing speakers who have graciously accepted to come talk about their experience working at Natural Resources Canada and the different roles and opportunities commonly found within the department. The audience will also have the opportunity to ask questions to the speakers via the chat function towards the end of the session. Mais tout d'abord, je vous invite à répondre à quelques questions afin de briser la glace et de voir ce que vous connaissez du ministère. Je vais vous partager mon écran dans quelques instants. Donc, voici les questions et je vais ouvrir la fonction clavardage. So the chat should be open to everyone. So, first question to kick off our discussion, who is NRCan's current minister? Donc, qui est présentement le ou la ministre de Ressources naturelles Canada? Je laisse quelques instants pour que les gens puissent participer dans la fonction de clavardage. So I'm seeing a few answers starting to plop into the chat. So the Minister of Natural Resources is the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson. He was first elected as the Member of Parliament for North Vancouver in 2015, and he has previously served as Minister of Environment and Climate Change and Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard. Now for the second question, which is a bit more open-ended. In your opinion, what is NRCan's, or Natural Resources Canada, role in the Canadian Public Service? Donc, selon vous, quel est le rôle de Ressources naturelles Canada au sein de l'administration publique canadienne? N'hésitez pas à répondre dans la langue de votre choix, so please do not hesitate to answer in the question in the language of your choice, sorry. So I see a few answers: preservation, protect Canada's natural resources, environmental assessments, all very good answer. So the answer could take various forms, but fundamentally, Ressources naturelles Canada élabore donc des politiques et des programmes qui renforcent la contribution du secteur des ressources naturelles à l'économie, qui améliorent la qualité de vie des Canadiens et Canadiennes, et dirige également des travaux scientifiques dans tous les coins du pays afin de stimuler les idées et le transfert des technologies et des connaissances. The department also represents Canada at the international level to meet the country's global commitments related to sustainable development and natural resources. Donc, merci pour cette première participation. Maintenant que vous en savez un peu plus sur le ministère, nous allons prendre quelques minutes pour rencontrer nos invités de la journée. So on the line with us today, we have Christina, Varun, Chelsea, Colton, and Justin, who will talk to us a little bit more about their role and what they do here at Natural Resources Canada. Christina, would you like to kick us off, introduce yourself, and talk a little bit about your current position and experience working at NRCan and in the public sector?
Absolutely, Zachary. So to kick things off, like my fellow panelists, I'm currently a policy analyst at Natural Resources Canada, and I work in the natural gas and hydrogen division within the fuel sector. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, and I started in the public service as a co-op student at Global Affairs Canada, and then Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. But in 2020, I joined Natural Resources Canada as part of the Policy Analyst Recruitment and Development Program, which I believe some of my panelists did as well. And as a part of, as it's colloquially known, I worked at the Renewable and Electrical Energy Division, as well as the Critical Minerals Task Force, before landing my current role with the Natural Gas and Hydrogen Division. To describe some of the key functions and activities of my team I work in, within the Natural Gas and Hydrogen Division, my focus is on LNG and hydrogen projects. And the key functions, the day-to-day of this includes analyzing market trends, access and competitiveness of LNG and hydrogen projects, assess the impact of policies, programs, and regulations on fuel. There's also a little bit of work on the international investment attraction and engagement. For example, Asian economies looking to decrease their reliance on coal, and some project engagement, which means working with projects such as LNG Canada, Woodfibre LNG, and Cedar LNG on Canada's West Coast exports of LNG to Asia. So to finish off by explaining how these activities contribute to achieving the department's mandate, energy security and climate change are critical twin priorities facing the world now and for the next several years. And without energy security, there can be no successful energy transition. So after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, economies showed in 2021 and 2022 that they will revert to less expensive, higher emitting fuels when faced with a shortage of lower emitting energy and or unaffordable energy, which delays the transition to lower carbon economies. So a specific initiative the department has undertaken to stabilize supply chains in global markets was in March 2022. The Government of Canada announced that in response to requests for assistance from allies to address supply shortages due to the conflict in Ukraine, Canadian industry could increase its oil and gas exports in 2022 by up to 300,000 barrels per day, which included 200,000 barrels of oil and up to 100,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day of natural gas. So the intention of this action was to displace Russian oil and gas while avoiding increased emissions. So these activities contribute to achieving the department's mandate, as LNG and hydrogen have the potential to displace higher emitting fossil fuels, reduce global reliance on coal, support deployment of renewables, and enhance energy security. So to conclude today, Canada continues to explore ways to support the energy security and climate commitments of our allies by providing liquid natural gas and hydrogen in the medium term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Varun, would you like to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Zach, and really excited to be here today and looking forward to engaging with you all. My name is Varun Srivastsan. I work as an advisor here at NRCan within the Nokweewak sector, which is a center of excellence and expertise within the Canadian government on Indigenous participation in the natural resources sector. My background is in economics and finance. And prior to this, I used to work in the Parliamentary Budget Office, as well as in consulting for Indigenous economic development. Currently, I work at NRCan specifically on the Indigenous Access to Capital file. And this file transmits into a broader issue around Indigenous equity participation in the natural resources sector, but in the Canadian economy writ large. For 150 plus years, even dating back to the Royal Proclamation of 1763, Indigenous communities have been dislocated from the Canadian economy, Canadian society, and the Canadian social fabric writ large, which has meant, amongst many other outcomes that we see today within Indigenous communities, that they are not effectively able to participate in the natural resource projects, the infrastructure projects, the transportation projects, the fisheries, the agricultural projects that are happening on their territories and their lands, and aren't able to benefit from those projects as well. So myself and my team are leading on what the federal government can actively do in order to enable, catalyze Indigenous equity investments in the natural resource sector. Coming out of Budget 2023, we received direction to explore options for federal supports around access to capital. We're right in the thick of that and actively fleshing out what that policy is going to look like, what those tools are going to look like, and how they intersect with what not only Indigenous interests look like, but what industry interests look like, and what capital markets are going to be seeking at the same time. So my work really underlines the broader kind of natural resource sector mandate, as well as NRCan's mandate around increasing and enabling a natural resource sector participation for Indigenous communities. But more importantly, and I think this is where it gets really interesting, aligning interests across the federal government with industry, with capital markets, and of course, especially with Indigenous communities, to ensure that Canada is able to remain competitive in the global economy. Canada is able to advance its net zero targets to 2050. Canada is able to get projects done, and Canada is able to really ensure that Indigenous participation in the natural resource sector and in the Canadian economy remains its competitive advantage. So that's just a bit about what I do, and I'm happy to share more. Really looking forward to this, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Varun. Chelsea, would you like to continue?
Yep, sure. I'll just start by saying I took a little bit of a different approach. I'm going to speak to how I got to where I am and where I started. So first, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Ottawa, on the land in which we gather as traditional unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Thank you to the FYN for having me here on this panel. So as I said, I began my career in the public service when I was 22 years old. I was fresh out of my undergrad and I was eager to find a job that didn't include serving drinks or cleaning tables. I was hired as a casual employee for a 90-day contract as an administrative assistant to a senior executive. So there was no promise at the time of full-time employment or guaranteed permanency. I took a chance and I worked as hard as I could for those 90 days, learning the ropes, attempting to make sense of all these obscene amount of acronyms, and proving that I was reliable. My top priority, as I said, was securing full-time employment, and I trusted those around me who painted this opportunity as a stepping stone and a foot in the door of the federal public service. I had studied law and human rights in my undergrad, and I wanted to go to law school or pursue a master's degree in a related field. And there were just so many times where I questioned myself, why am I in this role? Is this what I studied? Why did I study for 4+ years in university for? And at 22, I really struggled to see the bigger picture, and dare I say, coming from a bit of a place of entitlement at the time. But luckily I came to my senses. I had a few humbling experiences and realized that a career is a marathon and not a race. I needed to learn from others around me to grow, and it didn't matter if I was an administrative assistant, a junior policy analyst, or a senior policy advisor. I wanted and needed to be seen as a doer and someone who could take what was thrown at me to get the job done. So in a big organization, it's sometimes hard to see the bigger picture, and you're not always going to be working on the hottest file or even in the most exciting sector. But taking the time to build relationships and true connections is what allowed me to see the bigger picture. And I stopped fixating on, is this what I was meant to do with my degree? And I started focusing on how I wanted to grow my skill set and apply it to the bigger picture. So creating a positive work environment surrounded by colleagues who I feel connected to is what's important for me. And in every role I have taken in my career, I carefully considered 3 things. So what does the leadership look like, considering their strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately, are we a good fit? What value can I bring to the team? And will I feel challenged in my role with room to grow? So I've worn many hats over the course of 14 years, from working in a small research office to senior executive's office. right up until my most recent experience with political staff working in the Minister's office with the departmental liaison. And each role and every step of the way has taught me that no job is too small. And when everyone does their part and pitches in where needed, the system works and great things can happen. I know that sounds cliche, but I built my career through networking, and I seek out those who I want to work alongside of to start a foundation to build from. So it took me a few roles to figure out where I am best suited and the happiest. And I wouldn't have made it this far without great mentors along the way. A mentor can really make all the difference in how you shape your career. So I'm now a senior advisor in a director general's office in the nuclear energy and cybersecurity branch. I do not claim to be an expert in this field, but I have managed to surround myself by a supportive team with solid leadership. And I now know after many years that I thrive in a fast-paced environment. Not as fast as Minister's office, so I've come down to the DG level, but I really enjoy seeing files from a high level and advising on those hot issues that really tend to flow through senior executive offices. I like to be where the action is. So as a senior advisor in an office of about 80 people, my role is very similar to what you would consider to be a chief of staff, liaising with 4 different directors, so 4 different groups, ensuring that the deliverables are tasked appropriately, reviewing and revising their input, and then briefing my senior management on the priority files related to our mandate within the lens of nuclear energy and infrastructure security that's related to cybersecurity. So I wish each of you the best as you embark on the start of your career, if it's in the public service, and keeping an open mind, building genuine connections with people and not files, and try to see yourself as part of the bigger picture. And if ever you lose sight, find a mentor to help you ground and reshape where you want to go. So thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. Colton, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yep. I'd like to also thank the YPN for having me, as well as all the attendees for coming out today. Hopefully this is valuable to you all. I'm also based out of NCR, so Ottawa, again on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. So I'll start off by first giving the context of where I am in terms of kind of the general kind of work that my team does, and then I'll also try to provide some perspective on how I got to where I currently am, similar to Chelsea. So my team is called the Renewable and Electrical Energy Division, which is part of the energy systems sector. And our primary goal is to support the federal initiatives regarding clean electricity in Canada. So electricity is a very interesting space within Canada, as it's a shared responsibility between provincial entities as well as federal entities. And as a result, it's always very interesting and kind of complex to figure out how exactly we can support provincial entities in their responsibility for the actual building and management of the electricity generation, transmission, and distribution system. So within that role, my team, which is called READ, we have the mandate of supporting electricity, and we do this by providing a variety of programs, doing facilitation with different entities to kind of work towards common goals, such as the Atlantic Loop, as well as supporting policy initiatives, which is thinking of things like targets or areas that we want to move forwards in a strategic manner. With respect to programs are a major component of my team's work. And so programs require a lot of work from the beginning thinking stages towards when they actually give money to people and build projects. Within programs, we first start with carrying out initial preliminary research and engagement to inform needs and the potential role for federal support. Next, we look to design specific program eligibility criteria and intake processes, which ensure that we can achieve desired objectives, such as reducing GHG emissions or building specific project types. The next stage, we accept proposals and we complete those evaluations based on specific criteria to make sure we're accepting the best projects. And then finally, we support those projects throughout their kind of project cycle, providing funding and making sure that they're able to achieve their objectives as desired. My team within READ is a more focused engineering team. So I have an engineering background. And so while my team may be 90 people, our engineering team is about 8 people within that 90 person team. Within that context, we provide a very important role in that the electricity system, while we have kind of federal targets such as net zero by 2035 for electricity, we have net zero 2050 goals for the system as a whole for the economy. These are all great targets, but fundamentally they need to align with the actual technical and physical capabilities of the systems. And so our role within our technical team is to identify the actual technical requirements for the systems and what specific technologies are needed to achieve those specific goals. So looking at informing technology or technical requirements for our programs to ensure they're aligned with those technical needs, identifying system needs through research, and looking for areas where federal support could be best suited to achieve those technical challenges, carrying out review of existing studies and reports in consultation with different provincial entities and stakeholders such as utilities, and then also informing and identifying specific areas that we think studies might be of use from a federal perspective to identify gaps and barriers which are limiting our ability to achieve transition objectives. So that's kind of what my team does in general. What I specifically do is kind of a whole mishmash of that stuff. I'm responsible for specific technology areas, so keeping up to date on what the leading best industry practices are for specific technologies within the clean electricity space, as well as providing support for the program development, as well as alignment with policy initiatives to ensure we're achieving technical and policy objectives. In general, maybe from a very high level summary, my role is basically as a translator to translate these very complex technical concepts that you need an engineering degree to understand to those senior policy decision makers that might not necessarily have an engineering background, but need to have, I guess, a high level understanding of why something is necessary to achieve a feasible, reliable, and affordable system. How I got here, I've been with NRCan since 2019, beginning as a co-op. As some of my other panelists mentioned, I was fortunate to actually begin as a co-op and then carry out through the remainder of my degree as an FSWEP. So FSWEP, I forget what the acronym exactly means, but you can look it up online. It's a great program. And within that, I was able to actually continue working part-time throughout the remainder of my studies, including my undergrad as well as my graduate degree. So I was actually kind of a student part-time for over 2 years throughout my degrees. And then I've been full-time as a technical advisor engineering since August last year. I highly recommend looking to FSWEP and co-op student opportunities. I know my team personally really looks to those opportunities, similarly to casuals, as Chelsea mentioned, to kind of have an opportunity to assess your competencies and make sure you're a good fit to the team. But we really do look to kind of leveraging those types of students and relationships that we already have, and then pulling them into our team because we know they're kind of a reliable and great contributor to the team. So that's basically how I got here and a quick overview of my team. Looking forward to your questions and hopefully we can provide some good insight.
Thank you very much, Colton. Justin, would you like to wrap up this first part of the session?
Sorry, muted. Should be good now. So yeah, thank you everybody. My name is Justin Henry. I've been at NRCan on and off since about 2015. So I'm on the older side of the Young Professionals Network. I currently work in the planning, delivery, and results team in the strategic policy and innovation sector. I took a similar approach to Chelsea and a little bit more about my job too. So take that in note. Je voulais premièrement souligner le fait qu'il y a une place importante pour les francophones au ministère. Je suis un anglophone de la Saskatchewan, mais je pense que le bilinguisme est très, très important. Même s'il y a des réunions en anglais, il y a des occasions de souligner l'importance du français. Par exemple, durant une présentation récemment, j'ai eu l'occasion de voir une présentation de la Commission géologique du Canada où il travaillait sur la science en français. So yeah, as I just said, like I think there is a place for French within the department. There was a really interesting presentation by the GSC, the Geological Survey of Canada, talking about like French science and how that applies. So I had a couple of things to start. I'm not to quibble with too much with the premise of this event, but I often think about how department is not really the right unit of analysis. It's been hinted at a little bit before, but you know, like any department, there are lovely places to work. There are quiet places to work. There are really busy places to work. There are like areas where you can really dive deep and become subject matter expert. You know, so I think that's important to keep in mind when you think about like sort of what you want to do early in your career. I'm saying this because honestly, I had a first hard time in my first stint in the department. I was so excited. I'd taken a number of classes in environmental economics. I wanted to work for NRCan, and I took a position, and almost immediately I realized I wasn't a good fit. That was when I learned how important it is to really think about not only about the work, about the people. And so out of that experience, I learned my lesson. I now work in a wonderful team with colleagues who I love working with and work that I'm good at. And so it doesn't have to end badly, but it's something to keep in mind. Because I think the thing that's really important to remember is that the federal government specifically there's so many different paths and so many different options. To be honest, you can even have 2 or 3 different careers. So there's a lot of variety in things that are available. And so sometimes, you go in with one idea and maybe it isn't the right fit, but it's important to sort of learn and really understand what you're looking for. I know when I came into this position, the most recent sort of work, I was able to really explain what I wanted out of the position, and that really helped me to narrow it down and to really find the right place. So we're talking a little bit about like how the department has made a positive impact on the lives of Canadians. So here, I'm going to pitch a little bit for performance measurement. So what I do is I work on the planning, delivery, and results part of SPY, and we do reporting and planning and reporting for all of NRCan. Specifically, my team, I'm on the Sustainable Development team, so we do a lot of reporting on the United Nations SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which came out through the Paris Agreement, and are sort of they call the Agenda 2030, and sort of the measures that we've committed to achieving by 2030. So one of the things I was thinking about, how does this relate to the lives of Canadians? And that's something of a challenge, especially in the federal government. Like, it can feel like a lot of times, like, it's a bit abstract, and especially I think sometimes in planning and reporting. But I want to make the case right now about that it's important. So it's been a bit of my wheelhouse, and I think it's important for all policy makers to think more about planning and reporting. And so it's really about the question, as you design policy, like, what is it that we are hoping this policy program initiative will do? And how will we know it's successful? It's really important to do these things at the beginning, because when you think about data collection, measurement, it's also mandatory as part of these proposals are sent up for government approval, but often it's kind of the last thing, the last piece. So I think it's important. And I have a quote here, which I think was really interesting and speaks to that. So I'll post a link later, but basically it says, what would convince the powers that be that the actions and inactions to date have failed to meet the expectations and objectives? It's an interesting question because it's so rarely posed to leaders and crafters of public policy. It's very easy for politicians to make announcements for things that they want to do, spend money on mental health supports, divert cash for building infrastructure, hire police and nurses, but they rarely, if ever, pair those announcements with objective metrics that clearly explain what the outcome will be. And because we don't have clear goals and targets for outcomes, it's impossible to gauge whether government policies have failed. It's easy to give an example, like, we're going to build 40 safe injection sites and put 1 million doses, but that's about inputs. Inputs are easy. You have to really think about like the outcomes. And again, really, if nothing can fail, then there's no way to know which side of a particular what you're doing. Like, is things going to get better with increased resources, or will they get worse because it's actually feeling more of the same? So again, think about that in terms of policy making. I think it's important. In terms of what I do, other departments I work with, we work a lot with ECCC, so we call them Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC. This place is really bad for acronyms, and especially even so in the planning world. So they're the department responsible for the federal Sustainable Development Strategy. We also work quite a bit with ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada. They are the ones actually that have a UN SDG Secretariat, or Sustainable Development Goals Secretariat. So they're the lead for the Government of Canada. And they're, as an annual event, actually they're presenting in July to the United Nations on the Voluntary National Review, which is basically the Government of Canada saying, here's the things that we're doing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So that's an important thing. And my team has been coordinating a lot of that response within NRCan. A couple of other things, describe the work culture of the department. So I think it's important to note, like, I've been here since 2015 and okay, I'm talking too quickly. Okay. But I think it has a long track record of innovation. And the other thing that I would say about NRCan is it's a science-based department. So there are a whole sort of set of areas that are very, very technical, but have a really important role. For example, there's the Canadian Forest Service, or there's the Canadian Centre for Mapping and Earth Observation, and CCMEO, or that's what it's called, CCMEO, and they do things like they do, flood mapping. They also do, even for the wildfires, they have like a whole Earth observation stuff. They have satellites that are used in things like wildfires. So there's some really important, interesting stuff. There was a question about, I'm going to end this with a little bit on like what's important or most valued by the NRCan. And I see there's already been a couple of questions about that. And I think it depends a little bit where you are. But again, I found this was a really interesting article that I think might be relevant. First, sign up for Apolitico. It's a great resource for a lot of public sector thinking, and includes the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and other countries as well. There's a lot of different webinars they do or things that are there, and I think it's actually really interesting. And so one of they did something recently, and it really sort of hit me. It talks about like what are the power skills or the really important skills that you need to succeed in government. And so they did some research and found that almost everybody across countries and industries reported better results when the team members had both technical and interpersonal skills. So they identified 4 skills: communication, problem solving, collaborative leadership, and strategic thinking. So what I thought was interesting, they talk here, and this is a quote, it's about more than building relationships with people in other parts of the organization. What silo crossing is really about is enhancing your confidence in your own ability to plug into new situations and begin adding value. That comes from being able to initiate contact with colleagues elsewhere, which also prepares you over time to hold your own in conversations with senior leadership. They call them boundary spanning capabilities, and they talk about how it's integral to leadership and followership, cooperating between teams, and knowledge transfer within and between organizations. It's a practice that ought to be given from day one. If more public service leaders had not developed in silos and were willing and able to flex their leadership styles, they talk about like this presentation would really, that article would really be irrelevant. One benefit of reaching across outside your team for conversation is that you'll understand better the work of other units and how it relates to your work and that of the organization as a whole. And so I'm going to end on something that I think that's an important point. And I think that my key takeaway really from that is something that I've told a number of PARDEPs, the Policy Analyst Recruitment and Development Program at NRCan, that I've had the chance to talk to, that I always remind them, you were hired for a reason. You're very talented, you've got all the requirements, and so don't feel shy about jumping in. And I think that's an important point, because often we're a little bit shy, we're not sure how it works, but I think take advantage of that opportunity and learn, and you never know where it will lead. So I will end with that, and thank you very much. I look forward to questions.
Merci énormément, Justin. And for the next, pour la prochaine partie de notre séance, je vois que la plupart des participants ont déjà commencé à le faire dans la fonction Q&A. So I would like to remind you that if you have questions specifically for our panelists today, please ask them and vote up the questions you would like answered the most. There are already over 30 questions in the chat, so I'll try to bundle them together by theme, just so we could cover most of them, if not all, if possible. So maybe to kick off, we have a few questions related to how to get in the public service, how to land a permanent job. Donc, comment avoir un emploi permanent au sein de la fonction publique, au sein de Ressources naturelles Canada ou d'autres ministères. So the first question is, will there be a job board shared at the end of the session? So the intention today was not necessarily to share job openings or positions, but there are a number of resources you could look to, including GC Jobs, which is the official platform for recruitment in the public service, and you can filter them by department. There are also opportunities as co-op students and FSWEP and other programs, as speakers mentioned. And tied to that, there's also a question, so should one wish to move to NRCan, what is the chance of obtaining a permanent position within a year or less? So would a speaker like to talk on that a little bit? So essentially, what are the opportunities in terms of early career development, and how to essentially grab them by the horns? Yes, Justin.
Yeah, I'll answer that question, and I think others probably have some insight as well. It's difficult to say in general. There's lots of different ways. I mean, I think that one entry point that is kind of unique to NRCan is the Policy Analyst and Recruitment and Development Program. So that's a way in for many folks. So that's a good starting point. There are other opportunities. I think it's really about networking. Generally speaking, I would say that NRCan's a very busy place. There's lots going on. There's lots of so there are spots that are looking for people. And so it's a question of sort of again, sort of marketing yourself and identifying sort of where you want to work and finding a good fit.
Merci beaucoup, Justin. La prochaine question pour Chelsea. So Chelsea, what advice would you give someone to grow their skill set and apply to kind of a bigger picture if that picture is to work in policy in the NCR, and how one network in the region for a position in Ottawa or from the GTA, from someone coming with a similar background as yours?
Sorry, just trying to, is the question in the chat so I can read that again? Sorry, that was a.
No worries, it's in the Q&A section. So someone coming from a similar experience did co-op as analyst, yes.
Okay, yeah, for me, I would say it's about the connections, which if you don't have current connections, I have had people reach out to me before on LinkedIn or like not cold calling, but you're emailing and starting to just have a conversation and get to know what's going on at the department. And like Christina's a good example. She was in the part of program, one of our speakers today, and reached out for coffee. We had a virtual coffee during COVID, and then I kept her in mind for different opportunities. So when I was actually leaving Minnow, I reached out to Christina, and it's a good example of how just her initiative and reaching out and trying to stay connected. She was one of the first people that came to mind when I needed to find a replacement for myself. And so I know it sounds cliche to say that the connections, but it's you have to put yourself out there. I just want to make sure I'm addressing everything. I'm also a mom of three kids under 8 years old, and I'm running on a little bit of less sleep. So it was like a 3-part question. Is there a specific thing I did not speak to?
I think there was one about outside the NCR. So this is Justin, I'll just jump in. Yeah, I think it's a tough question. I see there's lots of questions about sort of remote work and all that stuff, and I'm not really going to speak to that directly, but I will say that it's a bit of a different world now in terms of the ability to sort of connect. And I think, yeah, so I think it's a bit more to explore, like that there are sort of different sets of opportunities, different pros, different cons, like things are a bit different. One thing that was interesting to me was how quickly the remote colleagues sort of got used to this environment because they'd been used to calling in and participating in meetings virtually. So I think, and generally speaking, NRCan's moving towards a hybrid environment. And so I think yeah, I'm not going to get into like sort of the details and stuff, but I do think it's a different environment. And so there are opportunities to ask those questions as you explore those opportunities. For example, like I have a colleague who, she works from Vancouver, and I've never met her in person, and I'm not sure if I ever will. And so there are opportunities out there.
To complement Chelsea's answer on networking, the Policy Analyst Recruitment and Development Program and Natural Resources Canada, someone established a virtual coffee system where you can be paired with someone every 2 weeks, every month. I'd highly encourage other people working in other departments, if you volunteer with your departmental youth network or otherwise, to establish something like that. It makes it very easy to meet new people who you wouldn't necessarily have stumbled across otherwise.
Yeah, and I'll just chip in from the non-internal perspective. So I think definitely getting your foot in the door can be challenging to some degree. As someone mentioned, GC Jobs is a great place to kind of look for postings. I know there's also informal job boards available on different sites, and those are always a good resource. But in general, just networking really is a great resource. There's a resource called the Government Electronic Directory Services, or GEDS. And so you can see all of the different people within the government, the organizational structures, and really you can just email people, find them on LinkedIn, get in contact. I think from the examples today, we're all really passionate about our work. We would be happy to kind of chat to you if you're interested in kind of different areas. And I know in many cases, I have lots of anecdotal kind of friends that have kind of cold email directors, and that's how they've got casuals. That's how they got their foot in the door. They kind of were able to prove themselves. They moved to a term, they moved to an indeterminate. And so really just network, put yourself out there, find a place that is interesting and have those conversations.
Just very briefly, I saw quite a few questions on mentoring. Yeah, it's a great thing to do. And it's not that hard to set up. Often it can be sort of, 1 degree of separation, as mentioned, LinkedIn. I have a mentor who's actually with the government of BC and has been a great resource for me, just sort of getting a bit of an outside perspective. And I think it's super useful. And the other thing is that the federal government, people are pretty willing to talk about their stuff, maybe more so than other areas of life. And so I think it's a good idea to just approach people and see if they're willing to chat.
Donc, merci beaucoup pour cette conversation qui a évolué. Pour résumer en quelques points, donc, pour ce qui est des nouvelles positions au sein des différents ministères, c'est important, en fait, les panélistes vous invitent à ne pas être gênés, d'essayer d'être proactif dans votre networking, même si ça semble être difficile. Il y a beaucoup de jeux de contact et de mentorat qui se fait un peu à tous les niveaux. Et tous les postes possibles sont des postes qui ont de la valeur un peu pour entrer dans la fonction publique et développer là, ces skill sets, si vous voulez, pour d'autres positions plus permanentes par la suite. Il y a aussi eu là, quelques points pour répondre à d'autres questions aussi par rapport aux opportunités de travail à distance. Donc, on est un peu dans une période d'évolution présentement où il y a beaucoup d'équipes qui évoluent avec un mode de travail hybride. Et comme Justin le mentionnait, donc des collègues qui habitent un peu à tous les coins du pays, ce qui crée beaucoup d'opportunités, c'est certain. Donc, il y en a définitivement plus qu'il y en avait avant. Donc, c'est pas nécessaire d'être dans un grand centre urbain pour avoir un de ces emplois. Mais bon, il y a beaucoup encore d'incertitudes un peu sur tous ces éléments-là, mais disons que les opportunités sont définitivement là. There's another question directly addressed to Chelsea. So Chelsea, you mentioned checking to see if a potential new boss has the right managerial style for you. How do you go about finding that out before you work for them, or is it too late?
So when I'm looking for a new position, that's the coffee dates that you have, and whether that's virtual or in person, that is, and I am like, I don't love going on those one-on-ones, but that's honestly the only way to figure it out, is to have a conversation. When the conversation turns to cross-country skiing and you realize you both have that in common, and how Justin said it, but it is truly a best fit. And I know we don't put that on job boards, but that is what a lot of senior management looks at, is it the right fit? So if you've I came in as a casual, they didn't have to keep me, but I proved that I could do whatever job they gave me, and I was a good fit with that executive. And sometimes that is really rare, and it is hard to find, because you're not going to jive with everyone, and it's not personal. You're not always going to get along or have the same values, so when you're in an interview and at the end, when they say, do you have any questions, you could say, what's your management style like? If you know someone that works in their group, or you can see on that directory online, which is called GEDS, you can reach out to someone and say, I'm looking at a job in your area. Can you tell me what it's like working with this person? And our policy recruitment program at NRCan has a really great network for being able to do that. So our partips don't take a rotation without checking first that that's a good place to work and that that's who they want to work for. And so you want to do the same thing regardless of where you're going. And it's something I didn't do enough of in the start of my career, and I definitely can be picky now.
Je vais juste ajouter 2 choses. Oui, c'est assez important de demander des questions aux gestionnaires, mais aussi aux d'autres personnes, vos futurs collègues, parce que je trouve en général au fédéral, comme on cherche beaucoup d'informations comme ça. Donc, c'est une bonne idée. Et là, j'ai oublié de deuxième chose, je m'excuse.
No, that's good. Merci beaucoup, Chelsea. Merci beaucoup, Justin. Donc, vraiment, le conseil principal ici, c'est de ne pas hésiter dans un processus d'entrevue à poser des questions sur c'est quoi le style de gestion des personnes avec qui vous allez travailler, de vraiment bien s'informer sur la nature des dossiers pour savoir justement si ça va être un bon match, un bon poste pour vous et pour vos intérêts. We have another question here from Rita in the chat. What obstacles have you identified that may impede your success? Geography, work life, skill sets, peers, too much accountability, and which of them are you willing to change? Would someone like to answer, talk a little bit on that? Chelsea, please.
I'll just say quickly, I recently came from the Minister's office, which was a great experience, but I realized very quickly that I was burning out. I didn't pull the plug soon enough and I officially burned out, which I'd never experienced before. And that was a hard lesson to learn. But as a young parent, I also recognized that I wasn't willing to give up my home life balance. And there are a lot of other jobs where you can have that 9 to 5 and that balance. And so I'll just say that.
Varun, please.
Sure. I mean, I think what's really crucial. So my background is not at all in the public service and in the public sector, and part of this I was in consulting. So for me, a big part of it was the cultural shift, and I think like the thing that folks that come out of the government kind of face is the fact that the culture and the pace of the work might be quite different. And the pace at which others are moving in isn't necessarily the pace which you're moving in. So I think that cultural shift ends up being really crucial and one that you might struggle with. To me, I've been really fortunate to sit in a really good team that moves at the pace that I like to move at. So I've really enjoyed that. But that's something that folks might grapple with. And to underscore like a point that was made abundantly in the previous response, like networking ends up being really crucial in that regard, because it's not just a fit about whether you're good for the job, but if the job is good for you and if the team is good for you, if the culture is good for you. So the federal government is a huge place with a couple 100,000 employees. So whatever kind of work style you'd like to work under, or what kind of team or what kind of file you want to work on, you can find it, because the federal government touches basically everything that happens in Canada.
Okay, yep, that's great. I fully agree. I think one advice I would give, just in a general obstacle that I think people face, is they're potentially scared to like make changes. I think you get comfortable in your role, and you don't necessarily want to risk moving to another position. I think the government is an exceptionally great place to do that, because there's so many like equivalent opportunities, and then worst case, if you don't like your job, you can potentially come back. So I think definitely if you want to climb the ranks, apply to jobs, reach out to people, do actings, do deployments, really kind of jump around, find the places that you like to work, the places that work for you in terms of the management styles. The government is just, because of the security, I think taking those risks is something that I think a lot of people are cautious to do and maybe scared. But if you want to climb the ranks and kind of get those opportunities like Chelsea mentioned, just kind of put your foot in the water, maybe. Is that a saying? Sure.
Yeah, dip your toe in the water, yeah. I just, to add to what Colton said, I think that's a really, I kind of made it in my presentation about like, you can have 2 or 3 different careers really. And it's about finding the right fit at the right moment. And I also think for me, I think one of the things is that there tend to be a lot of silos, both within departments, but across the federal government. And so for folks that are willing and able to kind of, go and see different places and see what the world looks like from another person's shoes is often important. And so that's something to think about too, as you go through your career, like, it doesn't have to be in one department, although if you want, that can be arranged too. Like, but there are a whole range of possibilities. I know for me, I took a 2-year assignment, and it was a really good experience to just kind of go to another department, get a sense. And when I came back, I kind of was much more clear in terms of what I wanted when I came back to NRCan, and that was helpful.
Les excellentes réponses. Merci à tous et à toutes pour vos commentaires là-dessus. On a une nouvelle question intéressante qui a gagné en popularité dans le Q&A. Donc, John mentionne qu'il a remarqué que la plupart des panélistes ont une maîtrise. Donc, avec ça en tête, à quel point est-ce que avoir une maîtrise, justement, est essentiel pour avoir des postes d'entrée comme analyste politique? Et depuis lequel type de maîtrise pourrait aider un individu à avoir une opportunité pour ce genre de poste. So John is mentioning that he noticed that most of the panel speakers today have a master's degree, and he wants to know how important it is to have a master's degree in NRCan for obtaining an entry-level position as a policy analyst. Would someone like to talk on that, Christina?
I can kick off to say you can check the chat for the exact requirements for the Policy Analyst Recruitment and Development Program. There's a graduate stream which requires a master's. There's an Indigenous stream that requires an undergraduate degree and 2 years of community experience. I will say I don't meet many peers without a master's degree these days. If someone else has a different perspective, jump in, perhaps Varun.
Yeah, I don't have a master's, and it's been pretty like I'll be very honest, it's been really good regardless. So I think like again, this is very contingent on the team you join, and the way I joined was quite atypical, where I just connected with someone offline and got through an informal process. So it can depend really on your trajectory into the public service. But for me, having or not having a master's has never been a barrier, and it's simply a choice on whether I want to pursue it or not. And to me, career progression itself in the federal government has not been restricted by what the education qualifications look like. I think it might matter at a certain point, but I think at an entry or mid-career level, it's still possible.
Yeah, I'll give 2 points. I think firstly is that it really depends on the types of positions you're looking at. I think for EC economist type roles, it tends to be more of a requirement. However, having said that, I will say that I think a lot of the time, I think masters are relied upon to kind of define your baseline requirements and say like, okay, you've done a master's, you've checked these boxes. But in many cases, I've seen postings that don't necessarily require a master's, and instead it's experience based. So especially if you can get your foot in the door, even as like a PM or something, which doesn't require a master's potentially, and you can kind of establish yourself, get those experiences and show equivalency to a master's. In many cases, there's internal opportunities or networked opportunities where you can say, okay, like I check all these boxes, I have all the competencies. I don't have a master's, but I've proven I can do the job. And in those cases, the master's really doesn't become as critical. But unfortunately, I think it does, especially getting in the door for ECs, potentially give you a leg up.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that input. C'est vrai qu'en fait, une maîtrise aide dans plusieurs cas pour obtenir ces postes d'entrée-là, mais c'est pas un prérequis disons, dans les compétences nécessaires pour obtenir le poste. Je crois que c'est un baccalauréat et ou des expériences équivalentes. So, master's degree is not mandatory to have the EC position. That's for sure. I see there's a question about someone having a decades in experience in the private and nonprofit sector, and that his biggest roadblock is for growth in the public sector is that everyone just assumes that he or she has a lot to learn, but wondering if any of the speakers may have advice for someone coming in maybe later on in his or her career.
So I was actually just typing out in the chat, but I'll say it here.
So
for the question, I think it's a good question. I mean, the public service tends to be, small c conservative, doing what we've done and being familiar with what we've always done. I think that's starting to change a little bit. But so it's kind of more, I think it's really about mindset. I think that, yeah, I think it can be a culture change. I mean, it can be very different, but that assumption that what we do is so exceptional or so different, it really isn't true. And I think it's just a question of persist and finding the right spot and being clear about, and I think this answers some of the other questions as well, just really be clear about what you want and what you bring to the table. Because I think that tells the story, interested in sort of knowing what are your skills, what are you bringing, can you contribute? And I think early also identifying things that you can really do to show that you're demonstrating value. I think that's key because it is a little bit different, but I think if you can sort of go in there and prove that you know what is going on and you can add value, I think the proof is in the pudding.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Add, when I first started my career, I was in the AS category, so that's administrative services. So I was in AS1 for 4 years because there was like a moratorium on anyone moving up or hiring because we were in a workforce adjustment, which was a very dark period in the public service in like 2012. So I got stuck in a silo of AS, and I actually was so frustrated. I resigned and left and went and worked 4 years in the public sector because I couldn't seem to make that jump into the EC category. So I went private to get I worked for a private consulting firm where I wrote policy mainly for government departments who hire contractors and consultants, and wrote a lot of policy for the Ottawa Police Service. And that's how I gained that experience. And then I came back in 2017, just happened to know an executive who needed an EA again. But I made a condition, like I didn't want to come back unless I could get into that EC category. And so just fought for that.
Merci beaucoup, Justin. Chelsea, donc Chelsea mentionnait justement que faut pas hésiter de faire son propre chemin puis d'essayer d'acquérir là, des compétences même à l'extérieur de la fonction publique. S'il y a certains types de postes, par exemple les SEC, qui répondent plus à ce qu'on recherche. Donc, un peu les chemins de progression, de développement de carrière sont très divers et il y en a plusieurs qui incorporent là, des expériences professionnels à l'extérieur du secteur public, soit dans le secteur privé ou dans les organismes à but non lucratifs. We're arriving almost at time, but maybe one last question answered extremely quickly by our panelists. What would you like to look back and say you were the most proud of in your career, let's say so far, in 1 or 2 sentences max, since we have a very short amount of time left? Maybe Justin?
Thinking about this, so I'll just be quick. So it was establishing basically a working group that really resolved an issue. I kind of identified there was a need for coordination. We created it, and it still exists. And we did it really served an important function, and I got to lead it. So there you go.
Super. Merci beaucoup, Justin. Varun?
I mean, to me, it's been the file I've been working on Indigenous access to capital, but more importantly, I think like it's about building a really strong team culture and a team ethic and really building a strong team. So I think that ends up being super important as you grow in the public service, your ability to build and retain a strong team. So that's something I'm really proud of myself and my team to be able to maintain.
Merci, Varun. Yes, Chelsea.
Oh, sorry, I'll just add, this is probably not the answer you want to hear, but at some point in your career, you will feel tired of what you're doing or your mental health might be tested. And for me, I'm really proud that I recognized where I was at with my mental health and took some time off when I truly did burn out, which I didn't realize was a true thing. And it took a long time to kind of come back from that. So just always taking care of yourself and putting that first. And I feel the federal public service has come a long way. When I left in 2012, I was going through depression and anxiety, and it wasn't really understood at the time. There weren't the same kind of, I'd used up all my sick days. It's totally different now. I feel like we have a different culture towards mental health. There's a lot of support. And so just recognizing that for yourself and taking care of yourself.
Merci, Chelsea. Christina?
I'll add, being based in Calgary, Alberta, there's a community of natural resource analysts, both within the fuel sector that I work, as well as more people kind of in the under 30 range or mid 30s. And I'm proud of the community that we've built in Calgary and supporting one another, being folks who work in the regions and outside of the NCR.
Let's see, Christina. Colton?
Mine's more forward-looking, I think. I think NRCan is doing a lot of really great work, but there's a lot of really important things that need to be figured out by 2035, 2050. And so I think looking down the road, I will look backwards happily on when we achieve some of these huge issues like net zero electricity. It's a massive challenge, and kind of just being able to contribute to that and be able to make sure that we're spending taxpayer dollars to support these critical files. It's really fulfilling, and I look forward to kind of contributing to those in general.
Merci beaucoup, Colton. Donc, vraiment, les panélistes là, nous mentionnent, d'être à l'écoute de notre propre santé mentale quand on développe justement notre carrière, de faire attention à ne pas brûler la mèche trop rapidement et de prendre les décisions en conséquence. Beaucoup de panélistes aussi sont fiers des accomplissements qu'ils ont faits dans leur carrière jusqu'à présent, que ce soit par rapport à construire certains projets avec leur communauté, avec leurs équipes, et aussi on hâte un peu aux opportunités futures et aux différentes opportunités que le département offre par rapport à tout ça. So thank you all for attending. Thank you to our speakers, Justin, Christina, Chelsea, Colton, Varun. Thank you immensely again for your time and sharing with us today. And I will pass the mic back to Guillaume.
Merci à toi, Zach. Encore une fois, merci à vous aussi, panélistes, Justin, Varun, Christina, Colton, Chelsea. Et puis, n'oubliez pas que les ressources sont toujours disponibles sur notre page wiki. Okay, resources are available on our wiki page, and the recording for this session will be available on our YouTube channel. Merci à toutes et à tous, et puis on va se donner rendez-vous à une autre prochaine fois. Bye bye. Au revoir.